Welcome to our very first tutorial on ancient Greece. Today, we're going to start with talking about the two cities, Athens and Sparta. Make sure you listen carefully and add your notes to your Poplet or some other form of mind map that you'd like to use as we go along. Athens and Sparta were the two most important city-states of ancient Greece. Both played an important role in Greek history. As allies, they fought together to repel the Persians in 480 BC. Later, when they became rivals, they fought together in the Peloponnesian War, in which Sparta became victorious. We're going to start by talking about Athens. Athens lies in Attica, a mountainous land of approximately 3,808 square kilometres with a long coastline. You can see Athens right here. Athens was said to have been founded by the hero Theseus, who united 4 Ionian tribes living in 4 villages in the same area. Early Athenian society was socially and economically divided. Aristocrats, known as eupatrids, held the most and best land. They also dominated political and religious life. Political, economic and community life in Athens was centred on its agora, or gathering place. During Athens' golden age, in the 5th century BCE, the agora was an open, tree-lined square that housed markets, shops, shrines, courts and other public buildings. Ordinary Athenians would have spent a lot of time in the agora. The philosopher Socrates spent a lot of his time in there questioning the people that he met. The Acropolis was the highest point in Athens, approximately 120 metres above the sea level, and it overshadowed the Agora. In early Athens, the Acropolis was a fortified fortress. Later, it became the most sacred part of Athens, as its most important temples and sanctuaries were housed there. The next thing we're going to have a look at is the Parthenon. And the Parthenon was one of the most important buildings in Athens. This temple was dedicated to the goddess Athena, was built on the Acropolis during the rule of Pericles between 447 and 432 BCE. Inside it was decorated and built with great gold and ivory statue of Athena. The Parthenon still stands, but in a deteriorated state. Over the centuries, many of its sculptures were removed and its marble was stripped for building materials. It was blown up in a battle in the 17th century and has been damaged by acid rain. I want you to add the word agora, Acropolis and Parthenon to your glossary and make sure that you have a look on this page for the definition. In a legal sense, there were 3 types of people in Athens in the 5th century BCE: citizens, metics, and slaves, as you will hear in the next 3 slides. Citizens were males born to 3 free Athenian parents. Citizens could own land. They had full political and legal rights. They paid no direct taxes. They took an ephebic oath of loyalty at 18 and were mostly shopkeepers, craftsmen or farmers. The metics were foreigners who lived in Athens. They could not own any land. They were forced to pay taxes, and they were attracted to Athens with the hope of becoming rich. They were mostly craftsmen. Our final group of people in ancient Athens were the slaves. Slaves could be either captured or born. They worked the land, but they could not own it. They often lived in dreadful conditions and they had no legal rights. Sometimes they could earn limited wages. They worked in the silver mines in the case of many state-owned slaves, and they could be educated and then work as tutors. One of the big differences between Athens and Sparta was that of childhood. When an Athenian child was born, it was handed to its father, who decided whether it lived or died. Sometimes it was abandoned due to its sickly appearance or because of the state of the family's finances. If it was kept, a baby was treated with kindness. Archaeological evidence suggests a childhood filled with toys and games in Athens. Hand-modelled clay figurines have been unearthed, as have spinning tops and board games similar to snakes and ladders. One of the major aspects of childhood is, of course, school. In Athens, school for boys began at the age of 7. They learnt reading, writing, and arithmetic. In the classroom, the boys used a wooden tablet covered in wax. They wrote with a stylus, which was usually made of bone or metal. The sharp end formed the letters, while the blunt end was used for smoothing out mistakes. At the age of 12, Athenian boys were taught music. They were also required to learn poetry by heart and the art of debating. Physical training was another priority. At 14, formal education stopped, and only the sons of wealthy Athenians continued their education under the guidance of their fathers. Sometimes a sophist, a type of philosopher, was employed. Between the ages of 18 and 20, the young men completed military training. Daughters of Athenian citizens were educated by their mothers. They learnt household tasks such as cooking, cleaning, and making clothes. In a few cases, girls from wealthier families were taught to read and write. If you're interested, later on you might want to look for more information about Athenian girls and women. Next, we're going to talk about Sparta. This is Sparta here. Sparta lies in Laconia, in the Peloponnese. This is one of the most fertile areas of Greece and is surrounded by high mountains to the east, north and west, and the sea to the south, which you can see really well on this map. Sparta was first established when the people of 5 villages joined together in the 8th century BCE. They went on to subdue what remained of Laconia. The Spartans were Dorians, a group of people who had invaded Greece from the north in the 10th century BCE. The early Spartans loved luxury, and music and poetry flourished during this time. And then in the 7th century BCE, a group of people called the Messenians, whom the Spartans had conquered, revolted against Spartan rule. It took the Spartans 17 years to suppress the Messenians' revolt. To make sure nothing like this ever happened again, the Spartans turned Sparta into an armed camp. Sparta was a closed society. Outsiders were not welcome. No description of Sparta written by a Spartan has ever survived. Sparta became a superpower in Greece and the main rival of Athens. And the important thing to remember is that Spartan society was dominated by the need to maintain power. All men of Spartan birth had to serve in the army. Their whole lives were dedicated to learning the arts of war. There were 3 types of people in Sparta in the 5th century BCE, and on the next page I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those types. All land in Sparta was owned by the state. It was distributed to Spartan boys at birth, with a farm and helots to work on it. Land could not be bought or sold. When a Spartan died, his land returned to the state. The state also decided what was to be grown on the land. The Spartan economy was self-sufficient, and money was in the form of heavy iron bars. The first group of Spartan people that we're going to talk about are the Spartiates. And feel free to correct my pronunciation because it may well be wrong. So the Spartiates were considered true Spartans. They were citizens of Sparta. If they were male, they were known as equals and expected to be soldiers. They were actually forbidden to use money or to be involved in economic activity. And if they were female, they were expected to produce Spartan men. The second group we're going to talk about, and once again, you may correct my pronunciation, are the Perioikio. They came from the areas of Laconia conquered by the early Spartans, and their name means dwellers around. They were free, but they were not citizens. They were mostly artisans, craftsmen, and they managed the economy for the Spartans. And they could be conscripted, if required, into the Spartan army. The third of the main groups of Spartans are the Helots. Now, the Helots were semi-slaves. They were most likely to be descendants of the Messenians. They were not paid, but were clothed and fed. And they worked the Spartan land. We're going to talk about childhood and education in Sparta next, and we're going to start with looking at the boys. Now, the way children were raised in Sparta is very, very different to the way children are raised in our society. There may be some little things that you can recognise where some ideas have come from, so keep that in mind and try and make those links as you go along. So, from its first day, a Spartan child's life was controlled by the state. Babies that looked weak were left outside, exposed to the elements until they died. At the age of 7, boys went to live in military barracks. They were housed in huts of 15 boys. In the classroom, they learned basic reading and writing, but the most important training of all was the physical training. And of course, you can understand why when you think back to the other slide where we talked about Sparta's entire goal being military dominance. So, boys that were perhaps not as successful were whipped and humiliated as part of a toughening process. Among other things, they learnt how to throw a javelin and fight with a sword. At the age of 12, young Spartans were given a cloak to wear for the whole year. It was meant to be uncomfortable, especially in times of great heat and cold. They also had to go barefoot. At the age of 20, equals, and you'll remember that an equal was a Spartan male, joined another mess hall, and even after marriage, an equal had to live in the barracks until he was 30. When he was 30, he was permitted to spend nights with his wife and family. So Spartan girls had to live at home until they married. They did not learn to read and write, but they did not learn about household tasks either, because these jobs were given to the Helots. Physical fitness was important, as it was thought to help them produce male Spartiates. Girls therefore learnt dancing, gymnastics, wrestling, running, discus, javelin, horse riding and chariot driving. Later in life, women were required to manage farms, supervise helots, and care for children. They had a reputation among other Greeks for outspokenness and aggressiveness. And according to the Athenian philosopher Aristotle, in his book Politics, many Spartan women became wealthy as the death rate among Spartan men was high.